Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam, and this week we're going to take a look at the 6 studio albums by uber cool New York guitar band The Strokes. The Strokes formed in Manhattan in New York in 1998 when singer Julian Casablancas, drummer Fab Moretti, and Nikolai Fraiture, bass player, already had a band together at school, but it was eventually rounded off by guitarists Nick Valenci and Albert Hammond Jr. Albert Hammond Jr., who had boarded with Julian Casablancas in a Swiss boarding school of all places, so they knew each other already. The band was sort of heavily influenced by the indie New York garage band sound, bands such as Velvet Underground, Blondie, Television, the New York Dolls, as well as sort of more unpredictable influences like Bob Marley. The band practiced around the warehouses of New York and fine-tuned a 14-song set that they ended up playing in clubs all over the city. And they soon became known for their kind of engaging personalities and their super cool demeanor and their hustle. They were a band of hustlers. They knew what they wanted. And with the help of Rough Trade in the UK, they put together a demo tape called The Modern Age in 2001, and that started a bidding war amongst record companies. A bidding war, what happened to those? That was won by RCA, and their debut album Is This It came out later that year. The Van band very quickly became sort of the darlings of the indie rock scene, and it's easy to see why. You know, they were good looking, they had a very cool demeanor, they dressed well, they're very easy to listen to. Their records are very well produced and arranged and put together. They're well sequenced, and these guys know what they're doing. You know, they were brought up as music fans, and they had a whole history of music to draw from, and you really get the feeling that they were determined to get it right from the get-go. And even if along the way they might have dropped the songwriting ball a little bit here and there, from their clothes to their videos, the band just exudes this kind of this super cool attitude. And their albums are short and sharp and chock full of busy, interesting guitar lines and fabulous choruses. And you could argue that they are the benchmark in modern 21st century guitar music. On the negative side, there's been rumours of a lot of animosity between the band, and I have to say that I've seen that once or twice myself watching them on stage. You know, a few years ago in Hyde Park, the 5 of them looked like they'd rather be anywhere else on earth than on stage together. But get them on a good night and they are one of the tightest, most exciting bands around. They're still together with the same lineup after 20 years, and they're still making great music. But look, let's get into it. And I don't think the Strokes have made a bad record. I just think some are less great or good than others. And I think the least great is their 5th album from 2013, Come Down Machine. The band didn't promote this record at all. They didn't do any press, any TV, any radio for it. So it kind of just landed in our lap. I kind of weren't quite sure what to make of it. Was this going to be the last record they ever made? And they didn't seem to be trumping it up as a great big comeback of any sort. And I have to say, the album itself it doesn't seem as full of energy and life as we're used to. And it's a bit of a dark horse in the Strokes' discography. Some people say it's more new wave than garage rock, whatever that means. But either way, there's kind of there's no underlying excitement, buzz that I've had before from a Strokes album. It's less sexy, it's more withdrawn. It's a bit like somebody has pressed the mute button on the band's sort of previously irrepressible personality. The press sort of liked it, and the problem is that lack of buzz seemed to sort of permeate into the music, and there's no killer track here, even though a couple are pretty good. All the Time and One Way Trigger were the singles, but they're clearly not up to the Strokes' usual high standards, as pleasant as they are. And it sort of feels a bit like a stopgap album, full of filler, really, Strokes filler. And a lot of people felt the band was kind of running out of ideas. It was still the band's 5th consecutive UK top 10 album, but it was their first not to crack the top 3. And it was after this album, I think a lot of people sort of might have lost their way with what the Strokes were doing and who they were. In fifth place, their fourth album from 2011, Angles. The band had been in the wilderness when they made this record. They'd come off touring the third album. There was rumours of infighting, legal battles, personality clashes, battles with addiction, and all of those things sort of pepper this record. They started work on it 2 years before it came out with producer Joe Ciccarelli, but they abandoned him as their producer of choice when they just felt it wasn't working with him in the studio. And what's worse, Julian Casablancas was recording all his vocals remotely, which was proving to cause all sorts of tensions and issues. They went into Albert Hammond Jr.'s home studio to complete the album with the album's engineer Gus Oberg, and eventually they got it done through all these problems. And the album does prove that the band was still absolutely capable of writing killer chorus that sort of bursts out from those wonderful jagged guitar lines. The album itself has got maybe slightly more of a pop angle than this sort of guitar, pure guitar bass that we'd heard before. There's more use of the studios, more effects, more guitar effects, and there's maybe sort of a broader soundscape than we're used to before. The album starts brilliantly with Machu Picchu and Under Cover of Darkness, which are classic Strokes tracks. But by the end of the album, I think you can hear the sort of weariness kicking in, lack of ideas, and for a band like the Strokes, that was kind of depressing, heartbreaking to hear. Well, in fourth place, their third album from 2005, First Impressions of Planet Earth. This is an angrier and darker record than the two albums that preceded it. It was produced by David Kane, who'd worked with Paul McCartney and Stevie Nicks, and it does have some really, really great moments, even if perhaps not as many as we had got used to hearing on those first two albums. I think with this record, you're sort of subtly starting to think, am I getting diminishing returns here? Have the Strokes really, made their masterpiece, and from here on, it's the quality of the music is going to decline. Now, it's not to say there isn't some good stuff on here, because as I've said, there's the killer opening with You Only Live Once, and then goes into Juicebox, which was their second top 10 UK hit. And Razorblade is great, but it does sort of peter out a little bit, unlike the first two albums. It got mixed reviews when it came out, but it's got to number 4 in the US, got to number 1 in the UK. But I hear this album and I enjoy it. There's no question of that. But I know just what they're capable of, and I just find it a bit frustrating. In third place, their second album from 2003, Room on Fire. This was originally going to be produced by Nigel Godrich, who'd produced Radiohead, but he was eventually dropped for a more established indie man, Gordon Raphael, who had delivered the goods with their debut album. And I think Room on Fire is a great record, but it is very much kind of Is This It Part 2. The band went straight back into the studio and they didn't mess with the formula at all. And I think it perhaps doesn't quite reach the songwriting heights of Is This It, but the vibe and the energy and the youthful swagger of a band with the world at its feet is all there. Reptilia, Automatic Stop, 1251, fantastic songs. And it perhaps doesn't sustain the consistent brilliance of Is This It all the way to the end, but it is still a bloody great listen. And the songs sound fantastic live as well. It went gold, but it kind of failed to quite match its predecessor's success on all the other levels. At number 2 is their sixth album and most recent album from 2020, The New Abnormal. So the Strokes had more or less been sort of silent for seven or so years. They'd done one EP, but a lot of us feared the worst after Come Down Machine. Had the band split up, what was going on, and there was no real official word. But a lot of people thought they were short of ideas, and I have to say, to my shame, I thought they had run their race. I didn't rush to hear this album when it first came out. But I was eventually I came to it not long, and I'm so glad I did. It was produced by Rick Rubin, and it proved to be a glorious return to form. From the opening track, The Adults Are Talking, the whole album is a gem. It just flows beautifully. It's cohesive, and Julian Casablancas he really sounds invigorated again in that kind of cool, disinterested New York way. The lyrics are great, the singing is great, it's less rock and it's kind of more indie pop, I think, than anything they've done before. There's keyboards and shades of electronica. There's even, hints at disco here and there, but it's all so cleverly integrated with the guitars. Bad Decisions at the Door, Eternal Summer. There's not really a bad track on here at all, I don't think. And I think it's one of my votes, one of the best rock albums of the last 10 years, really. The Grammys agreed with me. They gave it Album of the Year, and the Times here in England called it their second great masterpiece, and I really do think it is. So what's their first great masterpiece? Well, of course it's their debut album, Is This It, from 2001. So you've got to kind of set the scene with this album in the same way we did with Parklife last week. It's 2001 and Britpop is dead, and without wishing to slight bands like Coldplay and Travis, they were guitar bands that didn't really have an edge. And a lot of people started to think that modern rock music and modern guitar music was becoming quite insipid. Noel Gallagher famously called Chris Martin's band a bunch of bedwetters. So we needed something to bring rock music back from those sodden sheets. And this was it. Is This It came out in 2001 to a huge impact. And it really is one of the great rock albums of the 21st century, if not the great guitar rock album of the 21st century. It influenced a whole new generation of bands, most famously the Arctic Monkeys, but many, many others as well. Guitars were back. You had these great twin guitars from Nick Valencia and Albert Hammond Jr., and you had this metronomic Fab Moretti drumming and Julian Casablancas with the distorted, disinterested vocals. There was just no fat anywhere. There was no BS. There was no pretension. The guys were just young, good-looking, cool guys doing what they do, playing the guitar, making great music, not showing a lot of interest in all the sort of flotsam and jetsam of the stuff that goes around successful bands, other than the cool stuff, the sort of the fashion and the girls and all that kind of stuff. And they were a proper rock band again, like the kind we'd sort of forgotten about that we had in the 70s. And the whole album, it just fizzes and sizzles with this uber New York cool and this youthful sexiness and loudness, and it really is a masterpiece, I think. And the sequencing just makes the album zip along, and of course the album's sort of so short it finishes by the time you realise you really love what you're listening to. It's produced by Gordon Raphael, and it's chock full of modern guitar classics. Last Night and Take It or Leave It, Someday, Soma. You could literally name every track on this album as a killer track. I remember for a whole month I had Take It or Leave It on my brain, maddeningly on my brain, because I loved every hook in the song so much. It just drove me insane, I think, for a while. But I loved it. NME named it the greatest album of the decade. Rolling Stone named it the second greatest album of the decade. And it sold 3.5 million copies and still rising. And it is arguably the most influential rock album of the 21st century so far. And we're almost a quarter of the way through it already. Can you believe? So what of the Strokes away from their main albums? Well, they've done 2 EPs, The Modern Age and Future, Present, Past, both very, very enjoyable. And they've made a lot of... There've been a few solo albums as well, and I have to say I'm not that familiar with them. So if any of you have heard them and can recommend any of them, then let us all know in the comments below. I really do hope the Strokes, do keep making records and do stick together, because I think, when the stars align, they are capable of making really, really great music. I think the top 3 albums here particularly are fabulous, and I'd recommend them to anybody who is looking to get into a good guitar band. Are they the greatest guitar band of the 21st century? They may well be, but that possibly could be a list for another time. But look, let me know what you think of the Strokes and where you rank their albums, and we can discuss it in the comments below. And I'll see you again soon for another Rock Records Reviewed. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.